The law of supply and demand is a law of economics that states as the demand for a good or service increases, the value of that food or service also increases. An example of this would be copper production. As you see on a graph, as the amount of copper that was available dropped, the price went up. Let's think about something more recent. How about, instead of copper, we think about supply and demand in terms of toilet paper? Or better yet, how about those N95 masks? One current example is the N95 mask. At the onset of the pandemic, hospitals had a long-term contracts to buy them for about 35 cents each. When the need for the mask surged, these suppliers were not allowed to raise the price even if inclined to do so. That's because here in America, it is illegal to do price gouging. The government helps put that in check. But in other countries, along the supply chain, they figured out they can make big profits by diverting the masks to anyone willing to pay top dollar. That left hospitals in a bind. As the coronavirus spread in New York, executives hospitals searched frantically for the mask, eventually paying an overseas price of $6 each. So it went from 35 cents each to $6 each because the demand went up. The cost of environmental solutions can be high. To determine how much to spend to control air pollution, a community may perform a cost-benefit analysis. A cost-benefit analysis balances the cost of the action against the benefit expected from it. The result of a cost-benefit analysis often depends on who is doing the analysis. To an industry, cost of pollution control may outweigh the benefits, but to a nearby community, the benefits may be worth a high price. The cost of environmental regulations is often passed on to the consumer or taxpayer. The consumer can then choose to either pay more for the expensive product that meets the environmental regulations or find a cheaper product without the same environmental safeguards. Ecologist Garrett Hardin argued the main difficulty in solving environmental problems is the conflict between the short-term interest of the individual and the long-term welfare of society. One cost of any action is the risk of an undesirable outcome. Cost-benefit analysis involves risk assessment, which is one of the tools that help us create a cost-effective way to protect our health and our environment. To develop an effective solution to an environmental problem, the public must perceive the risk accurately. This does not always happen. In one study, people were asked to assess the risk from various technologies. The public generally ranked nuclear power as the riskiest technology on the list, whereas experts ranked it 20th, less risky than riding a bike. The government and the scientists often use rubrics that are designed to estimate these risks. Without realistic guidelines, such as rubrics, it becomes an opinionated free-for-all, and not everybody is a qualified risk assessmenter, as you can see here and here. Now, I want to point this out on this slide. If you notice on developed and developing, I highlighted the end of both of these words. You need to know the difference between them, and you need to make sure that you don't confuse the two. Developing countries have lower average incomes in simple agricultural communities and rapid population growth. Now, if you notice, it does not say poor countries. A good example is Africa. Africa, for example, is a struggling developing country. It is actually super rich in minerals, like really rich. You can find diamonds, gold, silver, and plutonium. Now, I picked both of these pictures because developed and developing countries actually have a lot in common. On the left, you have South African tourism, and on the right, you have a Broadway production tourism. I think the Broadway one is too hungry lying short of making it a live action event. Just joking. Population consumption. Almost all environmental problems can be traced back to two root causes. Human population in some areas is growing too quickly for the local environment to support, and people are using up waste or polluting many natural resources faster than it can be renewed, replaced, or cleaned up. This creates issues with sustainability. Now, these are one of the bullet points from the class overview. As you're going through these slides, every now and then, look back at the bullet points and see if what we're going over matches any of the bullet points. And then put a star or a number relating the page to the bullet point next to the bullet point. Now I have two videos on here for you, developed versus developing countries and why Africa is still in poverty. You must watch developed versus developing. Why Africa is still in poverty could probably help you answer some of your short free response questions or long free response questions. Be sure that you keep the bullet pointed questions, the multiple choice highlights and ideas, and the short and long free response questions close to you. So that way you can relate the slide number or page number that you're taking notes to the bullet points to help you review for the test. So go ahead. Ecological footprints are calculations that show the productive area of Earth needed to support one person in a particular country. Now that is per person. That is not people, birds, fish, all the other creatures that live in that area. If we continue on the path we're going right now, as population increases, by June 28th of 2030, we're going to need 2 Earths to support everybody. But if we were to reduce carbon emissions by 30%, and that's only carbon emissions, we're not talking about recycling, not using all the other aspects of sustainability. As population goes up, the amount of Earths we need would actually start to decline. Here's another way to look at an ecological footprint in regards to nations. If you notice below on the bottom, we have India, Mexico, US, and Britain. Why is US and Britain's ecological footprint so much higher than India and Mexico? Well, if you think about developed versus developing nations, US and Britain are definitely in the developed category, whereas India and Mexico are in developing categories. Critical thinking is super important, especially when there's so much information out there right now to try to filter out. A lot of times we think the news is actually doing the filtering, but the news is usually trying to get some reactions. They like to get data and use it to make political point, or they misinterpret it to support controversial data. People on the other side of an environment issue may feel passionately about their cause and can distort information to mislead people about the issue. This is a good example right here. So you're laying in bed, cuddling with your partner, and you hear it. Is smelling farts healthy? Research says maybe. Yeah, that's an absolute no. There's no treatments in any hospital that support that. Now, this article was actually written by someone with their master's, and it says her name, MD. What it does not say is her master's is in writing. There's nothing to support this. They can't even put a link to the data or the article or the research where they might have came up with this information. Critical thinking isn't a difficult skill to use. It's just difficult to remember to stop and apply it. There's been too often that I've heard people say, oh, blah, 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 as a matter of a fact statement. And you really need to stop and think, what are they saying and where did they get that information from? Was it a credible resource? Does this person have a history of studying in that field? For example, if my car was broken down, I wouldn't ask my dentist what was wrong with it, but I'm pretty sure my dentist would try to tell me what I need to do. Now, if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, I want to point this out too. A lot of us like to argue the same topic from two different sides, but we're still talking about the same topic. You really have to step back and realize that just because they're wrong doesn't mean you're right. And just because they're right doesn't mean you're wrong. There's a sliding scale on a lot of things. Not always. 2 plus 2 does equal 4. But there's other things out there where there is a gray area, and you have to be okay with that. The problems described in this course are not unpreventable and they're not unfixable. Achieving a sustainable world requires everyone's participation. If individual citizens, industries, and governments cooperate, we can move towards sustainability. For example, the Penpost River is cleaner and healthier now than it was years ago. As another example, bald eagles were once on the brink of extinction, but now they are making a comeback because of the efforts to preserve their habitat and reduce the pollution from pesticides, such as DDT. Nevertheless, our environmental problems are significant and require careful attention and action. The 21st century will be a crucial time in human history. We must find solutions that allow people on all parts of our planet to live a clean, healthy life with an environment and have the resources they need for a good life. And it's not just us, it's the animals, plants, and all the living organisms around us.